Boom, we are live. I really wanted to test out the new video countdown, so thank you for everyone bearing with us. Awesome. It was cool. It was cool. Hello, everyone. This is Aaron Wright from Teachable. Thank you for joining us today. We have an incredible workshop coming up with the team from We Are NoCode. We're going to get started in just a few moments. I'm actually just checking out some of my technical pieces here today. For those who are joining us for the first time, this is a wonderful free event. We have two incredible creators with us today, Christian Pevrielli and Eddie Whitaker, who are going to be discussing how to build your startup as a non-technical founder. Beyond covering how to build your startup, these are people I would look to, how to build a product, how to take an idea to market, and how to do it with really on a bootstrapper's budget. And I know a lot of those pieces are going to be covered today. Before we get started and kick into the technical parts of this workshop, what we would love is if you could let us know in the chat. You could see us, you could hear us. Christian, Eddie, say hi. Let's make sure everything works technically before we really get into this today.
Hello, everyone.
Everybody. Yeah, exactly. We're used to doing this. We always interrupt each other at the beginning. Like we'll go live at like a coaching session or something, and it'll be like, we are live. So we're quite used to this.
Cool. Well, so I'm still waiting to see in the chat that you could see us, you could hear us. I do see folks starting to tune in.
Kelly is saying good vibes. Steve is saying can see and hear you.
David, perfect.
Yes, thank you,
start
guys.
to see comments going. Cool. We just want to make sure everything works. Just to kind of go through real quick some housekeeping pieces for the format of this workshop. We posted earlier, there is going to be time for Q&A. And I think that is that we would suggest you highly utilize that function in today's workshop because, like we said, these are two experts on this respective topic. They've both built million-dollar businesses with no code and, bootstrapping it as well. For the next 40 minutes, Christian is, I think, going to lead the majority of the presentation. Eddie's going to pop in for a few moments. But as you have questions today, feel free to put them in the chat. Sorry, I saw a funny comment. If we really are live, can we say, hi, I love you? We love you. Thank you for joining us today. Yeah, we can do it. That is a fair thing to ask. Good question. First 40 minutes, Christian's going to run through this presentation, and we're going to really focus on leaving time for Q&A today. We've worked with these folks in the past. We know there's going to be questions. As you have them, put them in the chat. If we don't get to them, we'll try to get to as many as we can in the end. And I know, Christian, that you're going to close today with a bit of a special offer for the folks who joined us today. Without further ado, Christian, if you're feeling ready, I'll pop me and Eddie backstage and I'll hand you the platform.
Let's do it. I'm excited. Yeah, I'm always excited to do this presentation because we put it on for lots of different communities, including some of the major schools, USC, UCLA, Princeton, and it's just like, it's awesome. We get awesome feedback from that. And so for us, it's like, it's always a good time because we know that it's adding value. So it's like, okay, we're not wasting our time. People watching are not wasting their time. It's perfect. Eddie, what do you think?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things, this particular session is your session. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. I'll be reading the comments the entire time. I will be jumping in for 2 minutes to do a little presentation. But ultimately, we want to answer all of your questions that you have throughout the entire presentation, and then as well as after. So please use this time. Ask us any questions you have.
One last thing I wanted to add, Christian, before I hand it, is for anyone who joins us late, if anybody wants to go back and rewatch a point, there will be a replay available. So don't feel bad if you want to restart it. If you join in midway through and you're watching this, or even if you're watching this later, there's going to be a replay. This isn't something where you have to write notes the entire time and miss it. Have no fear. We'll make sure to get a replay out to you after. With that, I'm going to bring me and Eddie backstage. And Christian, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you said it perfectly. I think that it's like, we're trying to keep this format relatively casual. We do want to answer as many questions as possible. We will be going through a lot of content. And so just be patient. I'm sure you're going to be very excited about some of the things we have to talk about. But again, grab a little espresso and get yourself ready for this fun live party here. Let's jump straight into it with the topic that we'll be covering today. We're going to teach you how to go from idea to revenue without writing a single line of code. So this is essentially for non-technical people who are either trying to build an app business, trying to build a startup, trying to build any idea and bring it to market. So if you're just trying to test out a startup idea, this is also a great fit. But before getting to that, just a quick introduction about myself and Eddie and sort of why we created We Are NoCode, which is our company. So my name's Christian Pevrielli. Born in Switzerland, grew up all over the world. So mainly in Brazil, France, Greece, Cyprus, Spain, and a couple other spots, Venezuela. Speak 5 languages, now live in Los Angeles. I am the founder of 3 startups, have raised 2 rounds for those startups and had an exit. I then became the director of a startup program called Startup Boost, and I trained over 100 startups who went on to raise more than $40 million in funding and got into some of the most prestigious accelerators like Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 Startups, etc. So I had deep sort of understanding of startup methodology, of how to go to market, of how to grow businesses, but then also training founders. And throughout that process, I've always been non-technical. And that's actually in meeting Eddie, that's when there was really a pivotal moment, and we started building what now has become We Are NoCode. Eddie himself, he comes from a background where he speaks 3 languages, half German, half Russian. He was the head of product and innovation for some of the largest independent agencies in the US, prototyping and building awesome products for some of the biggest brands. So I've mentioned some of them here. But the most fascinating thing for me, essentially, was to see that he was building products for between $100 and $1,000 using this exciting new thing called NoCode that we'll be getting into a little bit later. But that allowed him a couple years ago to build Sizely. Sizely is a software as a service platform for people who are selling products on Poshmark, on Amazon, and others to get measurements and reduce their return rates. He built this in 90 days for $1,000 that was generating, at the time I met him, $12,000 in monthly recurring revenue. So there was obviously a very exciting approach in terms of the way that he was building companies, and it married very well with all of what I had done in the startup world. So I automatically brought him into the cohort. So this was at Google on Stage. We were training about 8 teams out of 400 teams every 6 months, put them in front of about 100 to 150 investors. And I wanted him to teach as many people the strategies that he had used to be able to do what he had done in terms of building his product and bringing it to market. Very quickly, we realized that we could only really help a very small select number of people. And that's where we decided to go on this mission, which is We Are NoCode, with the goal to empower the next generation of non-technical founders, entrepreneurs, and makers. So at this point, we have more than 300 startups from around the globe, more than 23 countries. A large portion of those are non-technical, and we've developed partnerships with some amazing schools, but also with accelerators, and we've been participating and adding value for nonprofits, specifically for underserved communities in Los Angeles. So that's a little bit about us. Now a little something for you. If you stick around till the end, we'll be giving you a special attendee bonus. So that is $1,500 worth of credits and discounts for select number of software platforms, some of them no-code platforms, and our startup toolkit. So it's a no-code startup kit, which is essentially going to give you everything you need to get started today or tomorrow. Hopefully today. A little bit of context before we jump into that. Building startups in 2021. A lot of things have changed. And this is why I just want to give a little context. Startup ecosystem has matured. If we talk about sort of investing or getting investors for your company, this is a good way of seeing how that's evolved. Back in 2005, if you were a person who had a great idea, you could get funding. 2010, you needed both a great idea, but also the team that was going to execute on that vision to get funding. 2015, absolutely needed a product, a software product, to get funding. And now we've really come to the point at which you need to get revenue to get funded or to get the external help that you need. So that really puts us in a dilemma as non-technical founders, which is, how do we actually go about building a first product, launching it in the market, testing, understanding what the customers need, building out a next version of that, getting to revenue, and then getting the help of either funders, accelerators, more employees wanting to join your team, or mentors willing to give up their time for it, advisors as well. And so that's really, when it comes to building the product side of things, that's where we saw there was the biggest friction. And the reality is there just aren't any great options at the moment. If you look at the sort of, the cross section you find yourself at, these are kind of the options, and none of them are great, right? Finding a tech co-founder ends up being a lot of networking at events and kind of trying to go to a bar to find a soulmate. It's possible, but it's just very unlikely that you meet someone that you want to work with closely for the next 5 to 10 years, who shares your values and mission, is willing to quit their high-paying developer job to join your mission. So it's not usually a very good use of time. It's usually a very big waste of money. Learning how to code, most people don't have 3 to 6 years to become very good developers, which leads them to wanting to hire developers. Now, hiring developers, if we're building a first product, an MVP, a prototype, you're looking at between $25,000 and $50,000. Most people just don't really have that kind of money laying around, specifically when they just have an idea, which is totally normal. But then a lot of people go into hiring offshore developers, or I also call them cheap developers, which can be cheap, but they end up creating what we call spaghetti code, which is essentially building it the wrong way. The code cannot then be reused, constantly debugging. It's an incredibly frustrating process, and I'm sure a lot of the people watching have gone through that process, myself included. So what's the conclusion? We're at this kind of frustrating turn point as non-technical founders where we kind of feel like tech people are getting a leg up on us, and we end up, in the end of the day, having looked at so many applications every 6 months from startup founders, I see a very similar sort of path where people are wasting between 6 and 18 months to get things started, usually spending a good amount of money because they actually hire people, more than one set of people to build things out for them. They end up missing out on opportunities because some of these opportunities, they're literally a window of opportunities, so they're time sensitive. So they end up missing out on those, and sometimes other people choose to launch quicker than them. And then also giving up on their ideas and themselves. That's probably the most frustrating outcome for non-technical people, and specifically people who have everything it takes to be a good entrepreneur. The other very big thing that's happening in the industry that we see all the time is people just not taking action, continually daydreaming about an idea instead of just taking the simple steps that you have to take to be able to bring this idea to market. And you can do that without spending a bunch of money. And that's why I want to introduce you to this exciting way of building apps as non-technical founders. So we're talking about web applications, mobile applications, websites, and this is why I wanted to take a little moment to introduce you to NoCode. So what is NoCode? What is this thing? I've heard about it on the news. People are talking about it. I don't get it. NoCode, this is one of the definitions. It's the art of creating or solving a problem that could have been done with code, but where someone chose more visual methods without coding. That is still very unclear, Christian. Okay, let me bring you through the evolution of programming then. The evolution is we used to essentially communicate with computers and tell them what we wanted them to do through punch cards and inserting them manually because those punch cards represent ones and zeros. Over time, we actually got better and processing power got better, so we invented programming languages. So it was essentially dealing with those ones and zeros and telling the computer what we wanted it to do. Now, what NoCode really is simply a visual interface. It's visual programming. It's a way to essentially build software with drag and drop solutions that allows you to build with everything has code behind it. You're simply not interacting with that code, or you don't have to understand coding language to build that way. So some people think of it kind of like designing in a PowerPoint and having it, and maybe like doing some of the logic in Excel. But essentially, there have been a suite of tools that have led this no-code thing. No-code is essentially a movement that started with a bunch of new tools coming out that allowed you to do a lot of stuff without coding. Now, at first, those things were, WordPress, Drupal, some of the older ones that still required some coding. They basically matured into tools like Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, where it's highly templated, and you can only pretty much build landing pages, websites, and e-commerce stores. And now in 2021, this movement of no-code is really around a suite of tools that allows you to go much further in terms of what you're building and allows you to build powerful and scalable solutions as well. So we'll get into all of the questions. I'm sure you have some that are already coming up. Please put those in the chat. We'll be able to field those questions. But let's talk about how this actually works. How do these no-code tools work? So think of it like this. The designing, instead of happening like this, where you're editing lines of code in a console, it looks a lot more like this, where you're essentially, let me see, yep, click happened properly, where essentially you are dragging and dropping. You're using this visual interface that looks a little bit more like a design tool than like a coding language. And that's why it's called visual programming. So in this case, this tool is called Webflow. It's one of the many no-code tools out there. So this is how designing happens. In terms of creating the logic, so how you want flows to happen, this is how it would look in a console again. So most of you probably don't understand this. In the new way of building with no code, essentially, it all happens in plain English. So when someone clicks this button, I want it to request a ride. I then want it to, it could also basically receive a notification and then, receive an update of where my car is at any given time. It allows us to create that logic, not in code, but essentially in plain English. So it makes it a lot more accessible for people who are non-technical. The benefits, so those basically were best represented by a venture capital firm, so investors in the UK called Forward Partners, and they called no-code kind of the new model of building companies versus the old model that had been used in Silicon Valley for probably the past 50 years. So essentially, time to building your MVP in the old model, about a year. Now with no code, that's about 6 weeks to build a product. MVP is the first product that you launch. It's a minimum viable product. We'll be talking about that a bit further. The cost, it is much cheaper to build with no code. So we're going from $50,000 all the way down to $1,000 in terms of building costs. And the team, we go from multiple people to a one-person team, and from technical to non-technical. So as you can imagine, this is completely revolutionizing the way that people are building companies, but also the way that people are building products. And we're seeing that more and more things are possible to be built with no code. And I wanted to actually, Eddie is going to be joining us right now and is going to jump in a couple real world examples so we can talk about those. And then we're going to continue with this presentation and go a little deeper.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. So yeah, now let's go over some of the examples so you kind of get a feel of what can be built and then also how quickly things can be built. So for instance, example number one, this is a solution that we built. It is a SaaS platform, a software as a service platform that was built in 10 days. The total cost, not going to lie, was $40. And the tools that we used were various no-code tools such as Webflow, Airtable, MemberStack, and Zapier. And this on its own shows you how quickly you can have an idea and essentially execute it into the real world with a limited amount of time and a limited amount of cost. Next example, here we have Proofreader. Proofreader is a platform that allows you to upload visual content and essentially proofread that for you. Just to give you some of the stats on how cost effective it was. Here it was developed for, or the building cost for this in particular was $500, built in 21 days. And the tools that we used here were in this case Webflow, which is a no-code tool. And then we connected it to a Google AI algorithm to do the proofreading and so on, right? So you essentially have the ability to use no code, or in this case, visual programming languages, and connect it back to the traditional tools that you see out there. Next example, here we have Sizely, and I think Christian mentioned that earlier as well. So here we're talking about this particular solution was built for $1,000 in 90 days. It's currently at, I think it's currently at 40,000 users, and now the revenue is also way higher than before. And overall, this is a solution that, had the idea, was able to quickly develop that, and no code essentially just allowed me to do that much quicker. So now I would like to step back for a second and essentially talk about how you can build simple as well as more complex products with no code. So for instance, here, let's say you're planning to develop a SaaS platform, a software, be it on a desktop computer or in an app. So in many instances, features such as the login, the sign up, the payment, the database, the user management, and notifications, all of them are pretty much, very simply configurable within NoCode. And essentially, as a non-technical individual, you can essentially build that already. For many, that's already a startup, that's already a software, that's already a company, that's already an app. However, if you need more advanced features, such as you might want to tap into an AI model, or you might want to tap into a database to essentially get traffic data, get shopping data, get stock market data, get weather data, any type of data, or as well if you want to tap into other marketplaces such as Amazon and Google. Maybe you want to use Amazon for their storage capability or for their algorithms, or for any other services that they have. You can essentially connect that all back into your no-code app or no-code software, all again with no-code, right? So for anyone that is a little bit more technical in this audience, here we're talking about being able to connect to third-party services via an API that you can, as a non-technical individual, simply write out in plain English. No coding, no weird, coding languages that you need to figure out. It's essentially all written in plain English that you essentially can connect it to your app. So next up, I would like to share some stories around the no-code community that we're really proud of. Here we have Nadeem, who's also a non-technical founder. He was able to scale Newest Stay to $5 million without no-code. For those of you who are not familiar with Newest Stay, it is basically the luxury version of Airbnb. Something that we see over and over and over again for anyone that is starting out with no-code and essentially building with no-code, they just don't need any investment. So in this case, in Nadeem's case, they never needed investment, and they also never needed funding, because the cost to build and maintain your startup and your company with NoCode tools is so minimal that you just don't need any investments, right? And we find this really, really encouraging, and think that this will change the future of how founders build startups. Next up, we have Danny. She has a really quite interesting story, and this ultimately illustrates how someone could, from not being technical to ultimately having a startup, right? So she quit her corporate job without a plan B, discovered the no-code sphere, and was able to build Scribbly.io, which is a content marketing service, within 8 weeks, all with no-code tools. And within the first, she's currently on a much higher monthly recurring revenue, but within the first 12 months, she was able to scale Scribbly.io to $20,000 in monthly recurring revenue. And this ultimately shows you the power of what's possible, and more importantly, how many founders around the world are now have the ability to execute on their ideas, to build, services and new products into the world. And we find this, incredible. So now I'll just go through a bunch of other examples to just give you, just to get the creative juices going, so you kind of get an understanding of what's possible. So if you are building apps, right? If you're building an app that is similar to a Lyft or an Uber or a Tinder or WhatsApp or Instacart, that requires features such as geolocation, messaging, or real-time tracking, all of those can be built with no-code and have been built. We've seen Lyft and Uber duplicates fully rebuilt in no-code, right? So that's totally possible, and anything in between when it comes to the features is totally possible. If you're building marketplaces where you exchange goods, such as Airbnb, Upwork, Amazon, Indiegogo, eBay, Fiverr, where you essentially have multiple parties buying, selling, or splitting payments in some sort of way, totally possible with no-code, allowing you to build features such as a profile, a listing page, so in this case, housing, or identifying the splitting payment, right? You're essentially buying a good, you want to pay the individual that sells the good to you, and then also maybe the platform is also taking a cut. So how do you all figure this out? Well, actually, in no-code, it's quite simple and straightforward to do all of the complex logic that you might think is complex, but essentially when you have it visually, illustrated, it really makes sense, and you're like, oh, it's not as difficult as I thought. And then lastly, if you want to check out more. Or lastly, if you also are building social networks or some sort of social platform, be it like a YouTube or a LinkedIn, a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or a Pinterest, allowing you for features such as messaging, notification, or just like the true social features such as image upload, video sharing, tweeting, whatever it is, all of that is also possible with no code, and we have countless examples around that. So if you want to check out some current startups that have built their entire solution fully in no code, feel free to visit our website. It's wearenocode.com/showcase. We have, I think, 50 examples of other current startups, right? These are currently operating startups that are built on a no-code, low-code stack that you can check out. So the answer now is, well, like the question now that I have to everyone, and that we also ask all of our founders is, can you build your app with no code, right? This is a question that we get very, very often. And the answer is, in many instances, pretty much always, yes, you can build your idea or your app in no code. However, and this is a gigantic however that Christian will elaborate a little bit more on, because it is very, very important to understand. Christian, tell us.
Yeah, you see who's playing. You see how we're playing good cop, bad cop. I'm clearly the bad cop because I get to deliver the bad news. Yeah, so the big however in this situation is that building, unfortunately, is not enough. And that is perfectly shown when you see that 90% of the apps in the iOS store are zombie apps, and that the number one reason why startups fail is because there's no market need. So there's this idea that we just have to build a product and they will come. And from one of the sort of the godfathers of startup methodology, Steve Blank, he says that build it and they will come is not a strategy, it's a prayer. And that's literally the way that people are building their products. They're like, I have an idea, I need to build a product. And then they've skipped so many steps before that they end up building the wrong thing for the wrong person. No one's using it, and it's a big problem. So building a product is only really a small portion of what building a company or a startup is. And that's why we say there are all these other things that you do need to learn to be able to be a successful founder. We are big believers that founders are created. It's a skill that is learnable. You need to learn how to figure out what the customer actually wants. What business model is going to capture the value for you? What pricing should you have on that? Sales, how can you acquire first paying customers? Marketing, how can you scale that to more people? Partnerships. I mean, I could name probably 30 more things that you need to figure out as a startup founder. And that's why learning no code is simply not enough. But this is why I wanted to bring you into a short sort of step-by-step methodology that we use internally to get our founders to go from, I have an idea, to building out a product, launching it, testing the market, and scaling that out. So it's a step-by-step methodology to building a startup as a non-techie. I'm going to be relatively brief here. Obviously, we go a lot more in depth in our program as well. But if just by understanding this methodology, this counterintuitive methodology, you're going to be ahead of the game. So first of all, it really comes down to the first step is let's set our hypotheses, right? We come in with an idea. It's basically something that exists in our mind. We don't yet know whether or not there is going to be a huge demand behind it. Hopefully, we'll believe in our ideas. So setting those hypotheses are important. And here it's about targeting the key hypotheses, right, that are going to make or break our business. A good example is with, for example, Airbnb. If one of their hypotheses was that people with second homes or their main home would be willing to rent it out to strangers. If that hypothesis was essentially proven wrong, then they would not really have a business in the same form as it is today, right? However, they proved it right. And so that's why it's so important to set your hypotheses at first, is because we need to actually bring those and test them. So the first thing we'll do in testing them is really customer discovery. That's essentially holding a series of interviews with the potential customer segments. So the specific individuals you think are going to be interested in your product and your product offering, and really having a conversation with them, not about your product. Let me stress that. You should not be talking about your product at all or your idea during these. It's really a discovery call, which means that you're trying to understand how this plays within their life and whether or not it's a problem that they have identified that is happening, regularly, and that they're willing to pay to overcome. So the next step is that analyzing that data, understanding which specific customer you should be going after first and which customers you should be going out after next. You definitely don't want to be the everything for everyone. That's going to be a big mistake. Once we have that data, we essentially know what people say that they want. But as humans, we understand that the difference between what people say and what people do is enormous. So we really need to put that to the hard test. And that's why we jump into NoCode for this next step. So at first we create sort of the branding, the content that we need to go ahead and build a first market test. This is also called a smoke test. It can also be referred to as a problem solution fit test. But essentially, we're going to build something and we're going to test whether people are taking an action that shows that they're willing to buy or the closest thing to buying, right? So you really want to de-risk your startup opportunity by targeting, like, are people actually taking actions in line with what they say they wanted? If the answer is no, well, then even if you build the entire platform as you've dreamed of it, you're still going to have to face the problem of people not wanting to use it. And that's the usual problem people make, right? Once you've actually built out that test, we're going to go out there and we're going to essentially promote it and start measuring the results of it. So there are ways to do tracking, to do analytics that allow you to understand, like, okay, like, people are clicking on this. Some people are getting lost here. Some people don't really understand. A lot of people are not scrolling to the bottom. There's a lot of different things that you can measure to improve the experience. But the idea is that we're actually going out there and selling the product as if we already had built the entire thing, so that we make sure there's enough demand so that we've completely de-risked the investment of time and money as a founder putting into this next phase, right? Our whole thing as founders is how can we see the most progress and de-risk as quickly as possible what we're working on, and as quickly as possible reach revenue. So once we've sold it and we have a lineup of people who are ready to buy, then we're ready to build out the full-on features that we need as MVP features, minimum viable products. So the fewest features that you need to essentially build out your product. So as I mentioned earlier, there are so many no-code tools in the market right now that understanding and learning the right tool for the right features list that you're trying to build in and of itself is an undertaking. So essentially, there's a lot of steps in building that first product fully with no code, and then bringing that to market, monetizing, and suddenly once you've essentially sold the product and built the entire product, you're ready to fulfill. Some people say, okay, this is it. We've won. We're millionaires. Absolutely not. This is the point at which you essentially start the iteration. So this is when you start improving that experience for your customers and figuring out which next feature those customers want. So you're actually being fully guided by paying customers. A huge disclaimer on this entire process. People close to you will tell you that they like your idea. They want to be nice. So most of the time you want to be working with people who are outside of people that you actually know. And that for some people may feel a little bit uncomfortable. Well, guess what? Entrepreneurship is uncomfortable. You have to start feeling comfortable with uncomfort. But we've created an awesome program that essentially allows people to go through all the steps they need to go through the early stage and to learn a process that allows them to essentially execute on their startup ideas. And that goes from building the product all the way to monetizing customers. So let me introduce you to the NoCode Startup a little bit. This is an action-based program for early-stage, non-technical founders to build, launch, and monetize their startup without writing a single line of code. So what does that mean, Christian? So essentially, it is a mix between an accelerator program where you'll learn how to build startup companies and how to scale those out, as well as how to build products, so a product school. So learning how to build apps, websites, and that's our real aim. In the end of the day, our program's aim is to empower non-technical founders, and more specifically, what that means is that we help them build their app without being techies, to go out and acquire users and turn those users into paying customers, and to save a bunch of time along the way. Because when you look at the average startup, again, I was going through 400 applications every 6 months. It was insane to see that most founders were falling into the same mistakes that were costing them time, money, or both. So that's the aim of this program. What does it include? So essentially, this is how it works. We have a step-by-step curriculum. It's a video curriculum that's hosted on Teachable. where essentially we break down every single thing step by step. You can also learn at your own pace, and you could take it, start at any level. So if you've done all of the validation and you already have lined up customers and you just need to build that MVP to fulfill, great, we'll take it from there. If you come in and you have 3 ideas, great, we'll start from there. And so that's the idea. It's completely no fluff, action-based program. Don't expect to come in and feel like you're in Netflix. The idea is we want to teach you a concept so that you can apply that concept, and then you can learn from that test and move on to the next thing. So everything is very action-based. It's here's this thing, and then we're going to show you how to do it. And so on the accelerator modules, we'll be teaching you everything from sales, business models, pricing, marketing, go-to-market strategy. We provide templates, workbooks, and blueprints, so you can essentially kind of like cut through all the trial and error phases. And we teach you a select number of no-code tools, click by click. So we essentially break these tools down in a way where they're digestible instead of trying to teach you everything, like the feeling it is when you come to one of these platforms and go into their educational section. And more importantly, teach you how to apply them to build your specific product. Now, obviously, people have questions specific to what they're doing. Every single founder who joins our community has access to our weekly coaching and mentorship with myself and Eddie, where we answer just so many questions, from technical questions to go-to-market questions. Sometimes it's about a specific deal that someone's going through and they're trying to figure out what the next step would look like. Personalized feedback to essentially break through your roadblocks. We also have, because we know that you shouldn't be waiting for once a week to join the cohort sessions. What we also did is that we created a private video Slack support. So essentially, instead of answering your questions, we're literally going into the product that you're building and recording a video showing you how to adapt things within that product. So the video support has just been absolutely instrumental in getting people to from I don't know how to do any of this stuff all the way to, oh my God, I just built this and launched it myself. It's an incredibly empowering feeling, really. So we also have $300,000 worth of perks and discounts from over 175 services. We pretty much have a discount for every single no-code platform that we teach within our program, apart from Zapier, who does not do discounts at all, nor do they need to. As part of this, obviously, we have this amazing global founder community that you'll be a part of. Connect with others, get feedback on your ideas, find co-founders. It's been really fun and it's growing. We've been asked for more and more interactions, so we've been giving it. Lately, we released founder speed networking events, where essentially one-on-one short video chats with founders in this community from around the world. Again, finding awesome co-founders, share ideas, exchange skills. It's all about working together. And oftentimes we just don't have that kind of support or people in our world who are also entrepreneurs. So being a part of this is so important in terms of getting everything that you need to get started. So you get the know-how step-by-step curriculum, you get the coaching, which is super important, you get the networking to be able to grow your team, grow your ideas, also be able to find study buddies. That's been a trend in our community. Also, the perks and discounts allows you to save a lot of money along the way. And the video support really is very key to all of this. Because our goal for you essentially is to go from this traditional path where people are just making a lot of the same mistakes, usually costs about $50,000 and over a year of your time. And we want to bring it down to this. So there's no straight line, but you can go a little bit more straight if you're not just trying to figure it out on your own. So we really bring down that $50,000 and 1 year of your time down to $1,000 and 3 months of your time. So the idea is, if you learn a repeatable process, then suddenly you're able to launch companies, and at some point you are going to find one that sticks and that you want to scale to the moon. But if it takes you a year to try one startup idea, then that is going to be a problem in terms of draining all your resources. So we're really in the game of increasing the success rate of startups. And we've created a program that would not have to have us charge what we usually charge our other clients but bring it down to a program that would cost less than 1 credit at a major university. So our tuition for the program is $1,997. You get lifetime access. So again, it's equal to 1 credit alone at a major university. And this is the point in the presentation where the presentation wouldn't be as exciting unless we had a special Discover launch day offer. So essentially trimming 25% off of the tuition for anyone who wants to join. So that is $1,497 to join our program for life and to learn the repeatable methodology that you can use to launch startups, to build apps. We even have some of the people in our program selling apps to other people. As part of this package, you get the accelerator modules, you get all of the no-code learnings, you get the coaching, the video support, you get the private channel on Slack as well. You get a founder speed networking events and also access to the global community. So we really know that this is the future in terms of the way that most companies are being built, let alone just tech companies. Like this is basically every startup is a software business. Every business, whether you're selling wood, requires some sort of software as well. If you wanted to use a 3-pay, you want to split it in 3 payments, we have a 3-pay option where you can join us today for $597. You can click, I think, somewhere close in the comments of the YouTube channel, but also potentially on the right-hand side or on the page itself. You'll be able to find all that great stuff, and Teachable Discover will help us guide you there. So again, we also have the single payment, which allows you to save $500 on the tuition and essentially become a founder of the future. So the idea is you can launch 1 startup, you can launch several startups. We literally are not, we're in the game of increasing your chances of success. And most great founders actually have failed their first couple of companies. So we understand that this is a learned skill. The quicker you upskill, the more likely you are to really get the results you're looking for from it. On top of that, we have a 14-day refund guarantee. If you don't like the value that we're bringing to you, then we are happy to give you your money back. All we ask from you is that you take some actions in terms of building your startup, and we will fully refund you, because that's something that we feel completely confident in is in our ability to help you see the progress you're looking for. Some of our students also look to write this off their company as an educational expense. That often works if you have an LLC or C Corp. I am not a tax advisor though, so you would have to talk to one of those. We've also had people who are asking their employees to actually sponsor them through the program itself. And so the way they did that was that they, learning how to program without coding. And so they just have to present an invoice, which we're happy to give to you to deduct it or to get sponsorship from your employer. What keeps me and Eddie going is essentially the fact that we get to work with amazing people with great projects, and people like Harmony, who have been incredible students in our program, like Sean, who talks about essentially that we've developed this awesome program that truly helped him in achieving his goals. We also have Alec and a bunch of other people in the community. But these are the kind of people who really just for us help us understand that what we are doing is driving enormous value for all those people out there who actually are kind of scared of launch. They're scared. They think they don't have enough time to build their startups, and to get them to break through that and to actually realize that they can do a lot of this stuff themselves, that they can become self-reliant. And so, that's what essentially keeps me and Eddie going. It's this idea that through this program, what we've been doing has been essentially helping people become founders of the future. And so that's exciting to us. So these founders, who are they? What does that mean to be a founder of the future? For us, our definition is essentially someone who can identify and fine-tune opportunities really quickly. So really define, figure out which opportunities are not opportunities, figure out which ones are best to take action on now if you have several ideas, but to increase the chances that you're targeting an opportunity that really has legs. Also, to be able to build MVPs cost effectively without developers. The amount of time that I've seen people spend and the amount of money I've seen people spend on this phase is really sad. And obviously, to be able to iterate and turn those customers into, those users into paying customers without having to hard sell. A lot of people are really reluctant against sales. I'm also not a huge fan of sales as it is, but what you realize over time is that if you're actually targeting the right value proposition to someone, you don't have to be hard selling. And that's what's so exciting about this process. As founders, we get to build companies and we get to be self-reliant. We get to finally break out of that feeling of constantly having to go back to someone who's technical to get things that we want done, to have to compromise on our vision when you can literally go about that yourself. And the tools these days, it's never been a better time. We're at the beginning of a movement that's about to completely change entrepreneurship. And we would love to work with you if that's something that you're looking for. If not, I hope that you really check out NoCode and you check out also a lot of startup methodology so you can increase your chances. With that, I'd like to thank the entire team at Teachable Discover and congratulate them on their launch of their new platform. And we'll start taking some Q&A. We do have some FAQs in case you don't have questions, but I'm sure we're not running out of questions.
We got quite a few to cover today. And I didn't start with talking about the launch because this is a soft launch. And for folks who have joined us in the past, we do look different today. The branding looks different. We're trying out all sorts of new stuff. So you feel free to reach out to us after, and my Twitter handles and my thing if you have any thoughts on it. We're learning as well. One thing I wanted to add, beyond thanking Christian and Eddie, as always, for the information you shared, is for everyone who watched today. You didn't mention it, Christian, but this Discover platform started as a no-code platform. We started with Webflow. We started with Airtable and some of these other tools. We started with Zapier and some of the other things named because this was an idea. We wanted to prove it out before we actually put some code to it. So, when people think, oh, you can't build real products, the reality is, our first 1 million we did in gross merchandise value, we did with a no-code platform. So awesome. You could build all sorts of cool stuff with no-code.
Another success story of no-code.
Yeah, 100%.
Join the movement. And that's a good point because you're also operating within the realm of Teachable. And so we really understand that companies now are starting to adopt this as the best way for innovation, launching new products, testing things, quick iteration. It's incredibly powerful way to go about building a startup.
Well, let's hop into some of these questions. We have so many. I wanted to grab just a few quick ones about the core stuff, and then we can go into people's respective startup questions. Awesome. A quick one I saw is this one I wanted to bring up, which is what is a good plan for how much time a week you need to devote to the NoCode Startup? How many weeks do you recommend? A follow-up question related to that is also, how long is the video coaching available? They're kind of tied together questions.
You get lifetime access to the video coaching and the video support. So that's a really big point. Eddie,
and the reason why is because, Christian and I, we've been founders pretty much, our whole life. And we know that, building startups is not like a quick 6-week workshop and you come out with $1 trillion idea and $1 trillion company. No, not at all.
That would be awesome, though.
That would be awesome, right?
That's not how it works.
It's totally not, right? And we want to be fully realistic and also be very encourage founders throughout the entire journey. That's the reason why we have a lifetime access, right? So it's essentially like you can join all of our coaching sessions for life. You can be every week there, ask all of the questions, or you can check in once a month. It's really up to you. But we know that it's not like a quick, sprint and then you're done. No, it's a triathlon, right? And we want to support you across the entire spectrum of it.
Yeah, we've just seen, and frankly, I've run accelerators enough to know that just like very short support, short and sweet, like it just doesn't cut it for startups where you have questions that constantly come up. You need advice on a different stage because you've reached a different stage. So that, advice also has to evolve. So yeah, essentially at the moment you get lifetime value. This is going to be something that we will change in the future. Obviously, at the moment, we are 300 startups are in our accelerator program. But in the future, we might have to change the duration of the program, which is why it's a good time to get in. In terms of the time, as I mentioned, the people who see the best results are actually the people who go slow and steady over the people who come in and want to just like slam through everything and get it like all done like tomorrow. It's like, so we see people actually who put in like 3 to 5 hours a week. And more importantly, join the coaching sessions and ask questions in the video support, that's where you're getting all the value. It's literally having us as advisors every step of the way. So, like, of course, there are people out there that have the proven process that to use, and you just click on 3 things and hang out in Mexico and do nothing and make money. It's not realistic. We are really in the game of following you for the long term, and that's a proven model, basically.
Thank you both for that. I'm gonna grab a few more of these. One thing I just wanted to add to that community in the live video piece is, I think one of the things that's not talked about often in building startups is that it is if you don't have community, it could be a very lonely experience, because the things you deal with daily, it's hard to understand unless you've been there before. So there is something to be said. I think one of the biggest parts beyond like actually building something is like just dealing with the mental hurdle of every day you have to wake up, and if you don't do those things, well, your product or idea dies.
Yeah, Jeff just Jeff just mentioned 12 months. Yes, you get lifetime access because you have access to the deal through Teachable.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
to be clear.
Exactly. And then also, Aaron, just to touch on that, I think like motivation plays a big role in essentially staying motivated on either doing the work, on executing consistently. That's why I think for us, we try to motivate all of our founders on a consistent basis, right? Don't bite off too much as you can handle, but as long as you're putting a little bit of work consistently over time into it, that's when you see success, right? And I think that's something that has never been talked about, but it is also about like staying motivated, staying curious to learn, and staying, eager to build your solution or build your product.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like to quickly mention is people are always very worried about like saving time. We actually are creating a video on like basically like 10 time wasters for non-technical founders. But what you realize is that the biggest expense early on is actually like living expenses, your rent, your car, all your bills. Like, so the difference between building something in 3 months and a year is dramatic in terms of money, even though it sounds like, okay, like, essentially like, I don't feel like I should be, buying anything. It's just insane how far ahead you can get. And right now, startups, it's a competitive market. So getting ahead is like kind of the way that you have to go. So this is one of the ways to get ahead. Yeah. So I'm sure we have so many questions.
Yeah, I want to grab one more course-related one, and then let's start getting into people's like specific startup ones. This one is from, let me grab this, does access to the We Are No Code, does tuition include access to future material or updates to We Are No Code? Because these spaces, great.
Yes, we are actually, you constantly have to reshoot because platforms change, things change, methodologies change. So we are constantly updating to that. Absolutely.
And my personal mission is currently we offer $300,000 of discounts and perks to all of our founders. We're trying to push that to $500,000 of discounts and perks that you get. So by joining, you will also benefit of, us pushing up the discounts and perks for our founders.
Yeah.
So if it's cool with you both, I want to grab some of the specific ones. I'll be honest, some of these we may not have answers for, but at least we can give some of them shots, right? Because this is one that even I'm kind of curious is, thinking of no-code apps, thinking of like PCI, SOX compliance. I can think of code ways of doing this, but do you either have any ideas here?
So when it comes to no-code, you will not build a full-on payment platform yourself, where you deal with chargebacks, where you deal with security and so on. Unless you want to be a payment platform, right? But if you're, like a marketplace and you just want to do enable, why not use the best payment provider out in the world called Stripe? Oh, guess what? Stripe has a, 2-click integration that allows you to accept payments. They are PCI and SOX compliant. Looks like a win. So that's usually the other, the answer is yes, totally possible. All of the heavy lifting is already taken care of for you, as well as the security by just integrating with Stripe.
Including products that allow you to do split payments and more complex payment styles based on your business model. Subscriptions is going to be different than one-time pay, which is going to be different than, it's like, yes, absolutely. And you want to rely on third parties a lot of the time. Like we get this idea of this question of cybersecurity. Well, guess what? When you're actually building a product leveraging no-code platforms, you're leveraging all the efforts of the no-code platforms' own cybersecurity. So they basically, it's going to be much more cyber secure than actually having a small team of developers who are more focused on shipping features. So that's kind of like you're on the shoulder of giants, which is really a powerful thing.
Totally. Well, and to bring it into like even on a bigger company, how even we think of it, you want to focus on the thing that you are going to be known for. If your product idea is, creating a B2B marketplace that connects people who love books, which was an idea that was in there I want to get to, your specialty and knowledge is probably on books. You shouldn't have to be a specialist on PCI or SOX compliance. You can just use Stripe and get that out the box. Saves you time and energy.
Yeah, nor does it make sense exactly for your time and energy.
I do want to grab this next question, and because this is like at the biggest abstract level, right? You talked about all sorts of different things. There's a lot of no-code apps. What if you don't know which no-code app to use?
Yeah, so as Christian mentioned earlier, there are currently 1,200 tools that claim to be no code or have some no code component to that, right? So essentially, if you start in your no code journey, you have essentially 1,000 tools that essentially promise you the world, right? What we usually do for all of our founders, we first, try to understand the idea, help them with the validation, and then identify the quickest way for them to build their startup and essentially recommend what tools to use and how to use them, right? So it's almost like something that it's not necessarily being talked about, but we essentially help with the a product strategy when it comes to using the no-code tools. So if you're starting off and you're like, okay, let me just give me something, I would say some of the more pronounced no-code tools are Webflow, Bubble, MemberStack, depending on what you're building, Zapier, Integromat, Adalo, and then essentially you have a long list of other no-code tools that specialize in very specific niches. But again, it really depends on the idea. It depends on your knowledge. It depends also, where you are in the validation process. So, yeah.
There's another question I see here. Sorry, Aaron, I'm robbing your thunder here. From Kelly. She says, it's a really interesting question. It's like, I know my startup idea needs a developer, but this seems it could be a good way to go proof of concept so I could attract technical co-founders and get some grant money for from my state. That's absolutely exactly right. Like basically the idea is how can you get progress without having to find someone, because it will take time to find the right person, the right fit as a non-technical founder. If you have a technical person, that's great. Guess what? There's a lot of no coders who are also developers because essentially you get to build things much quicker with no code. So we're seeing that like founders are using it, but there's this idea of as founders, what you have to do, and the way that you get investment and grants and awesome employees is by, being a leader. And what does that mean? Leading by example. It's actually like, hey, this thing is happening regardless of whether you are there or not. Yeah. Once I actually heard this great thing where it's like there are two kinds of founders, and this came from an investor friend of mine. The ones who run after you all day, specifically at those events, the networking events or like panel events, and then the ones where you're running after them because they're going to do it anyway. And you definitely want to be the latter in your project. And you'd be surprised how much you can actually do without needing a developer. We're not also like, no code is not this thing where it's like, it's either code or it's no code. There's this beautiful ocean in the middle, which is called low code, where you're connecting no code tools using some code, and you can build both of those. So Kelly, you're absolutely spot on.
Mm-hmm. And then also just to kind of like simplify that for some folks, when it comes to building a startup, building an idea, right in the very early stages, you have a lot of uncertainty. Is this feature needed or that feature needed? Is this working out or is this not working out? You need to be flexible, right? And no code gives you the ability. Right? Once you have higher certainty on the features, you're like, okay, those 5 features that we have in our platform are awesome features. Now we scale to 50,000 users and we see that our website is now half a second slower. Maybe that's the point where you say, you know what? Now I can talk to a developer to essentially allows me to scale to 1 trillion people and has a high degree of certainty about the features that I actually really need, right? Yeah. Because if you just go back and forth with a developer of like, oh, let's test this feature out, let's test this feature out. One feature to be developed in the traditional world might take a month. In no-code world, we're talking about 2-3 days, right? So you can test a lot of features to get certainty and then essentially build something that is very, very scalable. Here we're talking about millions of users.
Thank you both for that. Well, I wanted to get kind of a specific one. And again, you don't have to give, there's no perfect answer to these questions, mm-hmm. but someone asked about, I'm going to bring it up, the no-code marketplace for in-person services. And like, I was as this came up, I was going to reply back with like, you could use Webflow for the front end. You could use Airtable as kind of the database. Yep. Can you speak a bit to this? And also just like any sort of marketplace, like there's no perfect answer, but I would love to hear how you might take this on just as for the folks who watch today.
So just before we actually getting started, can you build X? Most likely, yes, you can. Is it needed? That's the big question, right? Is it really needed? Do you have people that are willing to pay for it? How do you have specialized knowledge in a niche that individuals have that pain point, right? In many instances, founders fail to answer that question and jump directly into the technology, right? So we can essentially say, yeah, you can build this and this is the most effective way and so on. But that's why we really double down on like, hey, let's validate and then start building. It's like we have an open curriculum where founders can jump in directly into the building or doing the validation. We have some, they're like, no, I don't need any validation. Let me start building. They start building, 2 weeks in, it falls apart because they're like, do I need this feature or that feature? How should I do it? Because they're so disconnected from the problem and from the customers, right? And then essentially they go back to the validation, right? So in short, yes, you can build it and there are various ways to build it. However, I would question first is like, do you have an audience that is willing to use it and more importantly, pay for it, right? Because you can create free products and classify yourself as a nonprofit, or you can essentially identify a problem that individuals are willing to pay for that makes you a company or a startup and essentially allows you to grow. Christian.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that answer. I think it's a really powerful one. I'm seeing, this kind of, it's such an interesting thing because there's so much miscommunication. I think that there's also like this idea of like code versus no code. And I think people are really kind of getting confused. And they're also getting confused in like the fact that like everyone just thinks like, oh, I'll just build this thing and people will love it. And I think that's probably the reason why most people end up failing. Specifically to marketplaces, there's this dynamic, right? Where you have two end customers. You need to please, if you think of Airbnb, for example, you need to please the host and you need to please the traveler or the person who's booking. So usually the way you want to approach that is to get enough inventory. So when you talk about inventory, Airbnb inventory, for example, are rooms, right? For a person trying to book a place in New York, if you type in New York and try to book a place and there's only one place, probably it's not going to really be interesting for people. So the first thing you want to do is get enough inventory to be able to test the demand side. But at the early stage process, you're also trying to figure out what are the benefits that are getting people to actually join and want to use. So for example, one of the issues Airbnb had early on is like getting hosts to use and to update their calendars to when the property was actually available. Imagine they were renting it out normally and now they suddenly had to. So that was a big, anyway, the idea with marketplaces is that you have two different customers. You need to understand that dynamic. And then you also need to find a way to chicken egg it because you can't please both at the same time. You first need to focus in on one. So usually you focus in on, well, if I can bring sales, then I'm going to make the host happy, right? So I need to be able to get sales. So my priority is actually bringing on the buying customer, right? Because you're promising hosts essentially the ability to bring them traffic, to bring them bookings, right? And so these are all things that you're going to want to think about. But when it comes to building it, you can absolutely build it with several tools like Webflow, MemberStack, and sort of leveraging Airtable as a database, CMS on Webflow. You could also build it within Bubble, straight up, which is all-in-one building tool. You could build it. There's like probably 3 other ways to build it. So there's lots of ways to kind of skin the cat. And that's why like we prefer to focus in on like the individuals and their needs and like what's your level and how much time do you have, and all these will like essentially determine the support and feedback that we'll give you that's going to be tailored to you.
Well, we are at time. I mean, we can answer a question or two more. I can stay for an extra few. But before we do that, I want to say, for those who stayed with us, for those who've been with us for the past hour, before we go further, let's let Eddie and Christian know in the chat. We appreciate them, that we're thankful for them doing this today. This was a free workshop. So, I appreciate you both being here. I learn things when you both speak. So if you're with us right now, please let us know in the chat. Just thank these two wonderful people for putting this on today.
And by the way,
go ahead.
And by the way, chat, awesome questions. I really, really love those questions. I'm really excited about those. I wish we had time to answer all of them, but I think, Aaron, we can take a couple, I believe.
Yep. I want to, I'm going to grab at least one more. And there was one that just came up around the class. In order to join the class and get the discount, do we go to the website and register? That link I just posted. Great question. First off, the link is in the YouTube chat. I'll repost it right now. It's also in the YouTube description. As long as you use that link and it's that Discover, beta.teachable.com one, that's going to get you what you need. So just follow that link. Again, I'm going to repost it in the chat right now while I'm talking about it. That link will get you what you need. But great question.
Awesome.
Let me pull this down. Actually, let me answer. I'll answer this one last. The Discover question. One more question I wanted to bring up here was this one. Last question for today is the use case for no-code testing and validation. Because you talked a bit about product market fit, and I think folks, depending what you learn, one of the paths is build the design, put it in InVision or Figma, and then test a prototype. No code changes that. You don't have to just have a clickable prototype. You could have something that actually does what you want it to do. Can you speak just a bit towards this?
Exactly. So the traditional approach was always like, let's draw it on a piece of paper, then have it in Sketch or Figma and so on, then hand it over to a developer, to a back-end and front-end developer. From there, let's give it to the QA department to double check and make sure that everything is fine. Then let's put it on production just to have the last run, and then push it live, right? So 15 different steps to get something done. Now imagine all of that is shrinked into one person. You design, you create also the logic at the same time and the code in the background. This essentially means it's not just like a clicky prototype. No, you're building out, in this case, the connection to Stripe. You're building out the logic. You're building out and creating the design that is, in this case, visible on a website or an app or whatever you want, right? You're essentially reducing all of those, multiple steps into one. And then more importantly, it is simplified and it's simpler for non-technical founders, so it becomes more intuitive. Just to give you an example, I used to design in Sketch, but now I just design in Webflow, which is essentially like allows me to design and create the code automatically, and I'm just faster in it. It's like almost like today you have better tools. Back in the day you had essentially like a piece of rock. Now we have a hammer. Why not use the hammer instead of the piece of rock? So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think the question also was with regard to like my offer is non-technical, which I believe is like either a piece of hardware, it's not software related at all. Yes, absolutely. This is the best way to test actually is to go the no-code route. Specifically for testing and validating, even right now, the biggest and the most important companies are using some of this technology because they realize it's just the smarter way to go. So we're seeing like Hulu starting to hire no coders internally. We're seeing what was the brand Chipotle launching new products that are built on no code platforms.
Exactly.
We see Teachable launching their Discover platform and seeing if it really has legs, and it does. So they're launching a new one now.
Yep, because they tested it on Webflow to really look at what features work the best, have a high degree of certainty. It's like, hey, now the metrics look really good. Now we can justify to double down on it, right?
Yeah,
and
I think the global argument here is that as non-technical people, we've always been in this position where we're like, well, I'm just not technical. Let the technical people do the technical stuff. And now we're getting into this place where every single job position requires some sort of interaction with software. Every single opportunity requires building some sort of software. Any type of innovation requires the same. And we have to accept that it's time to upskill. So right now, with these kind of tools and opportunities that are coming out right now, like this is an opportunity of a lifetime to get in and to use it as a competitive advantage versus just kind of like having to adopt it when people force you to adopt it later on in 10, 20 years when every job requires it, every startup requires it. And so that's why we say like, hey, use it as an advantage and essentially give yourself superpowers, become a no-code ninja.
And just to be clear, right, by joining, you will be able to build actual products, like actual companies. It's not going to be like a prototype or something gimmicky. No, it's going to be like after it's tested, it's going to be a startup. It's going to be a product that makes money, given it has product market fit, that you can scale and build a customer base around. We also help you with the marketing of like thinking about different ways. That's where the coaching sessions come in, but it's actually something tangible. It's not just like, quick play around and, learning a skill. No, it's like the skill of building startups consistently.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. We've went a little bit over time. I mean, what this tells me is we just got to have you back. So there's more questions. We'll go further into it. We'll do it again. Thank you, everyone, again for being with us today. For those who stuck around, don't worry, there'll be a replay available as well. Any of the links that were asked about, we'll try to email it out after, including any of the offers and deliverables. Thank you again. We really appreciate y'all today. With that, we're going to be signing off.
And best of luck on your journey, friends.
Exactly.
The NoCode journey.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.